I came home early to surprise my wife. What about your husband?
By next month, everyone will think I'm the widow.
I heard her planning a future where I didn't exist.
I wasn't supposed to be home until Friday. A business conference in Chicago ended 2 days early after the hosting company unexpectedly canceled the event. My flight landed in Dallas just before sunset, and for the first time in years, I decided not to tell my wife I was coming home. I wanted to surprise her. Emily's birthday was only a week away, and I'd spent nearly an hour at the airport searching for the silver bracelet she'd admired months earlier. During the drive home, I kept imagining the smile on her face when she opened the box. Looking back now, I realized that was the last peaceful moment of my life. As I turned onto our quiet street in Plano, Texas, something immediately felt off. 3 black luxury SUVs were parked in my driveway. None of them belonged to anyone I knew. Their windows were heavily tinted, and each vehicle carried license plates from different states. Emily occasionally hosted charity meetings, so visitors weren't unusual, but something about these cars made my instincts scream that this wasn't a social gathering. Instead of pulling into the driveway, I parked across the street. I grabbed the small gift bag and quietly walked toward my house, telling myself I was probably overreacting. Before I reached the front porch, I heard laughter drifting through the slightly open living room window. It wasn't casual conversation. It sounded like people celebrating. Curious, I stepped closer and carefully looked through the gap in the curtains. Emily sat at the dining table with 3 men I had never seen before. They wore expensive tailored suits, and a thick folder lay open in the middle of the table beside several wine glasses. One of the men leaned forward and asked in a calm voice, "What about your husband?" Every person at the table looked toward Emily. She smiled. But it wasn't the smile I had fallen in love with 17 years earlier. It was cold, confident, almost rehearsed. She slowly lifted her wine glass and replied, "By next month, everyone will think I'm the widow." The gift bag slipped from my hand and landed softly on the porch. Somehow, no one inside heard it. My heart pounded so hard I could barely breathe. Every instinct told me to burst through the front door and demand an explanation, but another voice inside my head told me to stay exactly where I was. If I walked inside now, I'd only hear excuses. If I stayed silent, I might finally hear the truth. My trembling hand reached into my jacket pocket, pulled out my phone, and opened the voice recorder. I pressed record just as another man at the table slid a photograph across to Emily. She studied it for a moment, smiled with quiet satisfaction, and softly said, "This replacement will be perfect." I couldn't see the photograph clearly from outside the window, but Emily stared at it with the kind of attention she hadn't given me in years. She slowly ran a finger across the picture before sliding it back toward the older man. "He looks convincing," she said. "No one will question it." The 3 men nodded in agreement, and one of them chuckled as if they had just solved a complicated business problem. My stomach twisted. Who was this replacement? And why did it sound like they were discussing a role that belonged to me? The older man opened another folder filled with legal documents. "Timing is everything," he said. "Once the paperwork is complete, the transition will be smooth. Banks, insurance companies, business partners, they'll all accept the story." Emily calmly signed one of the pages without reading it twice. She didn't hesitate. She didn't ask questions. She signed it as if she'd already rehearsed this moment 100 times. I had spent 25 years building my company and trusting the woman sitting at that table. Watching her sign those papers felt like watching someone erase my entire life with a single pen stroke. Another man leaned closer and lowered his voice. "What if he comes home unexpectedly?" My heartbeat stopped. For a split second, I thought they somehow knew I was standing outside. Emily smiled with complete confidence and shook her head. "He won't," she replied. "He's in Chicago until Friday. His schedule never changes." Everyone laughed again. I stood there in complete silence, realizing that the only reason I was hearing this conversation was because a cancelled conference had changed my flight. If that event hadn't been cancelled, I would have walked straight into whatever trap they were preparing for me. I kept recording every word, barely daring to breathe. Then the youngest man placed a tablet on the table and tapped the screen. A security camera recording appeared. My blood ran cold. It was footage from my own office. Someone had been watching me without my knowledge. The video showed me leaving work the previous week, followed by another angle from the parking garage. "We've tracked his routine for months," the young man said. "He does the exact same thing every Tuesday and Thursday." Emily nodded proudly. Predictable people are the easiest people to replace. My hands were shaking with anger, but I forced myself to stay hidden. This wasn't just a conversation anymore. It was a carefully planned operation, and somehow my own wife was at the center of it. Then the older man reached into his briefcase and pulled out a sealed envelope. He placed it in front of Emily and said quietly, "Everything changes once he signs this." Emily looked confused for the first time that evening. "And if he refuses?" she asked. The old man smiled, then answered with a sentence that made the air leave my lungs. "Then we'll make sure he never gets the chance." I stayed hidden behind the living room window, forcing myself to breathe as quietly as possible. Every instinct told me to run, but another part of me knew this conversation might be the only chance I'd ever have to understand what was happening. My phone continued recording while the envelope remained untouched in front of Emily. She stared at it for several seconds before finally asking, "Are we absolutely certain this can't be traced back to us?" The older man smiled with the confidence of someone who had done this before. "By the time anyone starts asking questions," he replied, "there won't be anyone left to answer them." A chill ran through my body. This wasn't a family argument or an affair. Whatever these people were planning had been carefully organized long before that evening. I replayed the last few months in my mind. Emily had become unusually interested in my travel schedule. She'd insisted I share my flight details every time I left town. She even convinced me to install a location sharing app, saying it made her feel safer when I traveled. At the time, I thought it was sweet. Now I realized I'd been helping someone track my every move. The younger man tapped his tablet again. A map of Texas appeared on the screen with several locations marked in red. One pin was my office. Another was our home. A third sat beside a quiet stretch of highway I used whenever I drove to one of our company warehouses. "This route is still the best option," he said. "Almost no traffic after dark, and very few security cameras." Emily studied the map before quietly nodding. "Good," she whispered. "He always drives alone." My heart pounded so hard that I was afraid someone inside might hear it. They weren't simply talking about replacing me anymore. They were discussing my daily routine, my habits, and even the roads I used. Every detail of my life had been turned into a checklist. For years, I'd believed Emily knew me because she loved me. Now I understood she knew me because she'd been studying me. The older man finally opened the envelope and removed a single document. Even from outside the window, I recognized my signature at the bottom of the page. I froze. "Impossible," I whispered to myself. I'd never seen that document before. The signature looked perfect, every curve, every stroke exactly like my own handwriting. Emily looked at it with satisfaction. "No one will question it," she said. "Especially after the accident." The word accident echoed in my mind like a gunshot. My hands tightened around my phone until my knuckles turned white. I knew one thing with absolute certainty now. If I walked through my front door that night, I wasn't walking back out, ****. The notification disappeared almost instantly, but I couldn't stop staring at the words I'd just seen. "Unknown AirTag detected, traveling with you for the past 27 days. My pulse quickened. 27 days meant someone had known where I was almost every hour of every day. I searched my suitcase first but found nothing. Then I remembered the leather briefcase Emily had given me for our anniversary. She had insisted on moving all my files into it herself. I opened the case, pressed against the inner lining, and felt something solid hidden beneath the fabric. Carefully pulling it back, I found a tiny white air tag. For weeks, my wife hadn't been asking about my schedule because she cared. She'd already known exactly where I was. Instead of smashing it, I decided to use it against them. I wrapped the air tag in aluminum foil from the emergency kit in my SUV, sealed it inside my stainless steel travel mug, and left it hidden beneath the driver's seat. Anyone tracking the signal would believe I was still parked outside my own house. It was the first move I'd made all night that wasn't driven by fear. If they wanted to watch me, I'd make sure they were watching the wrong place. I quietly left the neighborhood on foot and walked to a small 24-hour diner a mile away. It was nearly empty, giving me the privacy I desperately needed. I ordered black coffee, plugged my phone into a charger, and replayed the recording I'd captured outside my living room window. Every minute revealed another piece of their plan. They discussed forged signatures, insurance policies, company ownership, and even funeral arrangements as casually as people planning a weekend vacation. Then one sentence changed everything. The older man asked, "Has Harper confirmed tomorrow?" Emily nodded without hesitation. "He'll handle the board meeting. Everything is ready." My chest tightened. Jack Harper, my business partner for 19 years. The man who had helped build Walker Technologies from a struggling startup into a company worth millions. Suddenly, I remembered how often Jack had encouraged me to travel, how he insisted on handling meetings alone, and why he kept asking whether I'd updated my insurance documents. None of it had been friendly advice. It had been preparation. I checked the time. The board meeting started at 9:00 a.m., less than 11 hours remained before whatever they had planned would begin. Walking into that meeting could be exactly what they expected. I needed someone who couldn't be bought, someone who had uncovered impossible crimes before. I unlocked my phone, scrolled through my contacts, and stopped at a name I hadn't called in years. Rebecca Collins, ***. The former FBI financial crimes investigator who once saved my company. I took a deep breath. And pressed call. Rebecca answered on the third ring. "I was wondering when you'd finally call me again," she said. "I need your help," I replied. "Right now." The fear in my voice erased every trace of humor from hers. "Where are you?" I gave her the address of the diner. 40 minutes later, she walked through the door wearing jeans, a black jacket, and the same calm expression I remembered from years ago. She had retired from the FBI, but she still carried herself like an investigator. After sitting down, she looked at me for only a few seconds before asking, "Who died?" "I think I was supposed to." Without saying another word, I handed her my phone and played the recording from outside my house. She listened without interrupting. When Emily said, "By next month, everyone will think I'm the widow," Rebecca paused the audio and replayed the sentence twice. Then she listened until the conversation ended. She placed the phone on the table. "This isn't paranoia," she said quietly. "Someone has spent months planning your disappearance." For the next several minutes, she questioned me like I was sitting in an interview room. Who knew my travel schedule? Who handled company finances? Who had access to legal documents? Every answer seemed to confirm her suspicions. Finally she asked one question I wasn't prepared for. "Who benefits the most if you die tomorrow?" I didn't even have to think. "My wife, and my business partner." Rebecca slowly nodded. "Exactly." She opened her laptop and searched one of the names mentioned in the recording. Victor Kane, ***. Within seconds, an old newspaper article appeared. Victor had once been one of Texas' most successful corporate attorneys before losing his law license after a massive financial fraud investigation. The charges were later dismissed because the key witness disappeared before trial. Rebecca looked at me. People don't usually disappear by accident. A cold silence settled between us. What do I do now? I asked. You disappear first. I frowned. I have a board meeting in the morning. Which is exactly why you can't be there. If I don't show up, Jack will know something's wrong. Rebecca smiled for the first time. Good. She closed her laptop. Let him believe you're scared. I stared at her, confused. She leaned across the table and lowered her voice. They've spent months studying your every move. She paused. So tomorrow. You're going to do something they'll never expect. Rebecca pulled a small notebook from her bag and drew a straight line down the middle of the page. On one side she wrote, what they know. On the other she wrote, what they don't. She slid the notebook toward me. The only way to survive this, she said, is to stop thinking like the victim and start thinking like the people hunting you. Under the first column, we listed everything they already knew. My daily routine. My office schedule. My travel plans. My bank accounts. The location of my home. My closest friends. Even my favorite highway. Looking at the list made me realize I hadn't been living freely for months. Every habit had become part of someone else's blueprint. The second column was much shorter. They didn't know I'd heard the meeting. They didn't know I'd found the AirTag. They didn't know I had recorded their conversation. Most importantly, they didn't know I was sitting in a diner with someone who had spent 25 years investigating organized financial crime. Rebecca tapped the second column with her pen. This is your advantage, she said. As long as they think you're following your normal routine, they'll make mistakes. So what's the first move? I asked. She smiled. We let them believe you're walking into the trap. Her plan sounded insane. At exactly 8:30 the next morning, my phone would automatically reconnect to the network inside my SUV. The hidden AirTag would still appear to be parked near my house. Jack would expect me to drive to the office as usual. Emily would believe I had no idea what was happening. In reality, I would be somewhere else entirely. Rebecca booked a room for me in a small hotel under a different name, paid in cash, and insisted I leave my smartwatch behind. Anything connected to your identity becomes a tracking device, she explained. Before leaving the diner, she handed me a prepaid phone. Only this number, she said. Call no one else. I slipped it into my pocket just as my regular phone vibrated one final time. A new email had arrived. The sender was Jack Harper. The subject line read, "Looking forward to seeing you at the board meeting tomorrow." I opened the message. It contained only one sentence. Everything is finally falling into place. Rebecca read it over my shoulder. She didn't say a word. Then she quietly reached across the table, took the phone from my hand, and whispered. He wasn't talking about the meeting, ***. He was talking about your life. I checked into the hotel just after midnight under a different name. It wasn't luxurious, but that was exactly the point. No one connected to my life would think to look for me there. Rebecca insisted I pay in cash, avoid security cameras whenever possible, and keep the curtains closed. Before leaving, she handed me a prepaid phone. From this moment on, she said, your old life is bait. Don't touch it. Sleep never came. I spent the night replaying every conversation I'd had with Emily over the past year. The weekend trips she'd encouraged me to take. The sudden interest she'd shown in my insurance policy. The nights she claimed she was working late at a charity fundraiser. Every memory looked different now. It was like finishing a puzzle only to realize the picture had never been what I thought it was. At 8:15 the next morning, Rebecca called using the prepaid phone. "Your SUV hasn't moved," she said. "The air tag is still broadcasting from exactly where you left it. They believe you're home." That was the confirmation we needed. They were still watching the tracker instead of looking for me. For the first time since hearing Emily's voice through that window, I finally had one small advantage. 20 minutes later, Rebecca sent me a live update from outside my office building. The board meeting had started. Every director was present. Jack Harper was sitting in my chair, calmly explaining that I had been delayed because of travel issues. Then he did something neither of us expected. He handed every board member a sealed envelope. "What is he doing?" I asked. "I don't know yet," Rebecca replied. But nobody looked surprised. A few minutes later, another message arrived. "They've all signed something, ****. My pulse quickened. Whatever was inside those envelopes had been prepared before I ever returned home. This wasn't a last-minute plan. It had been building for months. Then Rebecca's phone suddenly went silent. 5 long minutes passed. No updates. No messages. Finally, the prepaid phone rang. It wasn't Rebecca. It was Jack. I had never given him this number. I answered without speaking. Jack laughed softly. "I've been wondering how long it would take before you stopped following the script." My blood turned cold. Then he said the last thing I ever expected to hear. "Rebecca says hello." For several seconds, I couldn't speak. The prepaid phone trembled in my hand as Jack's calm voice echoed through the speaker. "Rebecca says hello." I slowly stood from the hotel chair. "What did you do to her?" Jack laughed. "Relax. She's alive, at least she was 5 minutes ago." My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. "You've been chasing the wrong question all night, Thomas," he continued. "You keep asking who's trying to replace you." He paused. "You should have been asking, why?" The line went silent for a moment before he spoke again. "Go to your hotel window." Every instinct told me not to move. But curiosity won. I carefully pulled the curtain aside just enough to look outside. Across the street sat a black SUV. 2 men leaned against it, pretending to drink coffee while watching the hotel entrance. They weren't hiding anymore. They wanted me to know I was being watched. "You see them?" Jack asked. I didn't answer. "They've been there since 6 this morning." A chill ran down my spine. That meant they had found me hours ago. "So why am I still alive?" I asked. "Because you're more valuable alive than dead." The call ended. I immediately dialed Rebecca's prepaid number. No answer. Again. Voicemail. For the first time since this nightmare began, panic replaced anger. Had they captured her? Or had she simply gone underground? Before I could think further, the prepaid phone buzzed. A text message. Unknown number. Room 417. 10 minutes. Come alone. If you want Rebecca alive, ****. I stared at the screen. Room 417 was inside the very hotel where I was hiding. Someone already knew exactly where I was. I slipped my phone into my pocket and quietly opened the hotel room door. The hallway was empty. Every step toward room 417 felt heavier than the last. When I finally stopped outside the door, I noticed something strange. It wasn't fully closed. Just slightly open. A narrow strip of darkness waited inside. I gently pushed the door. The room was empty. On the bed sat only a closed laptop. And a single envelope with my name written across the front. As I stepped inside, the hotel room door slammed shut behind me. Then I heard a familiar voice from the darkness. "You're finally asking the right questions, Thomas." The hotel room door slammed shut behind me, and I spun around, expecting to see one of Jack's men. Instead, the room was empty. The only sounds were the air conditioner humming and my own heartbeat. On the bed sat an open laptop beside a large brown envelope with my name printed across the front in bold black letters. I approached slowly, careful not to touch anything unnecessarily. Years of running a business had taught me that evidence mattered. Inside the envelope was a single sheet of paper. Sit down. Press play. Don't panic. I looked around once more before opening the laptop. A video started automatically. The screen showed Rebecca. She was sitting in what looked like a warehouse, her hands untied, her expression calm. She didn't appear injured, but something felt wrong. "Thomas," she began, "if you're watching this, it means they wanted you to find me. This video was recorded an hour ago. Listen carefully. Do exactly what I say." She glanced off camera, as if someone was standing beside her. "Jack isn't the leader." My breath caught. "He works for someone else." The video briefly cut to security footage from inside my company headquarters. I watched Jack enter a private office carrying a thick folder. A man was already waiting inside, but only his back was visible. He stood nearly 6.5 feet tall, wearing a dark gray suit and black leather gloves. Jack placed the folder on the desk, lowered his head respectfully, and waited for instructions. Even Jack looked nervous around him. Rebecca's voice returned. "Everything you've discovered so far has been designed to keep your attention on Jack and Emily. They're important, but they're not the ones making the decisions." The video froze for a second before continuing. "Whoever this man is, he's been controlling your company from the shadows for longer than you realize." Then Rebecca leaned closer to the camera. "I checked your corporate records." She paused. "The majority shareholder of Walker Technologies isn't you anymore." I felt the blood drain from my face. That couldn't be possible. I had never sold my shares. Never signed any transfer agreement. Never approved any ownership change. The video ended with one final sentence from Rebecca. "Don't go back to your office. Because the man waiting there has been expecting you for years." The laptop screen went black. At that exact moment, my prepaid phone vibrated. A message appeared from an unknown number. "Look behind you." The message on my phone read only 3 words. "Look behind you." Every muscle in my body tightened. For a second, I couldn't move. Then I slowly turned around. The room was still empty. No footsteps. No voices. Nothing. I let out a slow breath, realizing someone was playing with my mind. Just as I turned back toward the laptop, another notification appeared. Wrong direction. My eyes immediately lifted toward the large mirror mounted above the dresser. At first, I saw only my own reflection. Then I noticed something else. A tiny red light blinking in the corner of the mirror. It wasn't a mirror. It was a two-way surveillance mirror. Someone on the other side had been watching me the entire time. I grabbed a chair and smashed the glass. The mirror exploded across the floor. Behind it was a narrow observation room filled with cameras, monitors, and recording equipment. But it was empty. Whoever had been there had left only moments earlier. One monitor was still running. On the screen was a live security feed from Walker Technologies. I watched employees rushing through the lobby while reporters gathered outside the building. News vans lined the street. A banner flashed across the bottom of the television broadcast. Walker Technologies CEO Thomas Walker missing. Board appoints interim leadership. I stared at the screen in disbelief. Interim leadership? The camera switched to the company's boardroom. Jack Harper stood behind the podium. With Thomas Walker unavailable, he announced, "The board has unanimously elected me as interim CEO." Several directors applauded. Then Jack held up a document. "I also have Mr. Walker's signed resignation letter." The room erupted in applause. I felt sick. The forged signature I'd seen the night before was already being used. Rebecca had been right. This wasn't about killing me anymore. They were stealing my identity before the world even realized I was gone. Then the camera zoomed toward the back of the boardroom. A tall man in a gray suit quietly stood near the window. His face was finally visible. The moment I saw him, I dropped the phone. I knew him. Not from business. Not from the news. From my childhood. 28 years earlier, my father had warned me never to trust that man. I had always believed he was talking about an old business rival. Now I realized. My father had been trying to protect me. Just then, the observation room door creaked open behind me. A familiar voice calmly said, "Your father knew the truth, ****. And that's why he had to die." The words hit me harder than a punch. And that's why he had to die. I spun around. Standing in the doorway was Rebecca. She looked exhausted, but completely unharmed. Before I could say a word, she raised both hands. "Relax. If I wanted you dead, you never would have made it this far." "What is this?" I demanded. "Jack called me. He said you were with him. He wanted you to panic," she replied. "Fear makes people predictable." She walked into the surveillance room and unplugged every monitor before turning back to me. "They've been controlling this hotel for weeks. Every room, every hallway, every camera was chosen to guide you exactly where they wanted." I stared at her in disbelief. "So this was all a trap?" "Yes," she answered. "But not the kind you think." She handed me a thick file. On the front was written, "Project Successor ****. Inside were photographs, financial records, forged passports, fake death certificates, and newspaper clippings dating back almost 15 years. Every file belonged to a wealthy business owner who had supposedly died in accidents, boating incidents, or unexplained disappearances. One by one, their companies had been taken over by trusted partners or surviving spouses. None of the cases had ever been reopened. None of the families had questioned the official stories. Then I reached the last page. A photograph of me. Across it, someone had stamped one word in red ink. Next, ***. My hand started shaking. "This wasn't planned for a few weeks," I whispered. Rebecca looked me straight in the eyes. "No. It was planned more than a year ago." Every strange event suddenly made sense. Emily encouraging my business trips. Jack pushing me to delegate more authority. The new briefcase. The air tag. The forged signature. Even the board meeting. Every step had been preparing the company to survive without me. Not because they expected me to retire. Because they expected me to disappear. Rebecca took a deep breath. "The man in the gray suit has spent decades building this network. He doesn't steal companies." She paused. "He steals lives." Before I could ask another question, my prepaid phone vibrated. A live video request appeared from an unknown number. Rebecca's face changed instantly. "Don't answer it." But it was already too late. The call connected automatically. The screen filled with a live camera feed. Emily was sitting alone in our living room. She looked directly into the camera, and smiled. Then she slowly held up the silver birthday bracelet I had bought for her at the airport. "I know you're watching, Thomas," she said softly. "And if you ever want the truth about your father's death." She leaned closer. "Come home." Emily's face filled the screen, holding the silver bracelet I'd bought only hours earlier. "Come home." The call ended before I could say a single word. I stared at the blank screen, my mind racing. Rebecca quietly took the phone from my hand and switched it off. "That wasn't an invitation," she said. "It was a test." "A test?" "They don't know what evidence you have. They're trying to pull you back onto familiar ground, where every camera, every room, and every person works for them." I looked at the bracelet in my memory. How did she get it? Rebecca frowned. "You dropped the gift outside the house." I nodded slowly. "Exactly. Which means she knows you were there that night." A cold silence settled over the room. I had spent the last 12 hours believing I was one step ahead. In reality, Emily had known I was listening from the very beginning. Then why didn't they stop me? I asked. Rebecca answered without hesitation. "Because they wanted you to run." Her words made my stomach tighten. They wanted you isolated. Alone. Afraid. A man with no idea whom to trust. She spread several photographs across the table. Each one showed me at different locations over the past 12 hours, the diner, the hotel lobby, even the parking garage where I'd abandoned my SUV. Someone had followed me the entire time. "They've been watching every move you've made since you left your house," Rebecca said quietly. I looked at the timestamps. The first photograph had been taken only 3 minutes after I parked across the street. That meant I had never disappeared. Not even once. Then Rebecca handed me another file. "This is what they really want." Inside was a confidential acquisition agreement. Walker Technologies wasn't the final target. My company was only one piece of something much larger. Over the past 10 years, the same organization had quietly taken control of 12 successful technology firms across the United States. Each CEO had either died unexpectedly, disappeared, or resigned without explanation. Every case followed the same pattern. A trusted spouse. A loyal business partner. A sudden leadership change. The signatures were different. The stories were different. But the blueprint was identical. My name was simply the next one on the list. Rebecca pointed to the final page. There. A flowchart connected every company to a single private investment group. At the top sat one name. Blackridge Holdings. "I've never heard of them," I whispered. "You weren't supposed to." She slid one final photograph toward me. It showed the man in a gray suit shaking hands with someone outside a courthouse 28 years earlier. I immediately recognized the second man. It was my father. On the back of the photo, written in my father's handwriting, were 7 chilling words. "If anything happens to me, never trust Blackridge." I couldn't take my eyes off the photograph. My father stood outside an old courthouse, shaking hands with the man in the gray suit. They weren't smiling. They looked like two people forced into an agreement neither of them wanted. On the back of the photo, my father's handwriting was unmistakable. "If anything happens to me, never trust Blackridge." For 28 years, I'd believed my father died in a tragic car accident during a rainstorm. That's what the police report said. That's what my mother believed. That's what I'd accepted. Now, for the first time, I wasn't sure any of it had been true. "Where did you get this?" I asked. Rebecca reached into the file and pulled out a faded cassette tape. "It was hidden inside a safety deposit box your father rented 3 months before he died. The box wasn't opened until last week." "Who opened it?" "You did." I frowned. "I've never rented a safety deposit box." "You didn't." She looked directly at me. "Your father listed you as the only beneficiary. The bank couldn't locate you because the contact information was decades old. After the board announced you were missing this morning, the bank finally released the contents through a legal review." She placed the cassette on the table. There was a note with it. I unfolded the yellowed piece of paper. "Thomas, if you're reading this, I failed. Don't make the same mistake I did. Trust evidence, not people, asterisk asterisk. My throat tightened. Rebecca quietly continued. Your father discovered Blackridge wasn't an investment company. What was it? A takeover network. She spread several corporate records across the table. Every company followed the same pattern. A successful founder. A sudden accident or disappearance. A trusted insider taking control. Within months, the business quietly became part of Blackridge's portfolio through layers of shell companies. Walker Technologies wasn't their biggest target. It was simply their latest. I stared at the dates. The first takeover had happened 32 years ago. Long before I had started my company. Long before I had even graduated from college. This operation had been running for decades. Then Rebecca opened another envelope. Inside was a recent employee photograph from Walker Technologies. I recognized every face except one. A young financial analyst who had joined the company only 8 months earlier. Rebecca tapped his picture. He isn't an analyst. Then who is he? She slid another document across the table. It was an old FBI identification file. The photograph matched perfectly. The employee's real name wasn't Daniel Brooks. It was Michael Cain. Victor Cain's son. My stomach dropped. Victor hadn't just infiltrated my company. He'd already placed his own family inside it. I stared at the FBI file for what felt like forever. The smiling young analyst I'd hired 8 months earlier wasn't Daniel Brooks. His real name was Michael Cain. Victor Cain's son. I remembered interviewing him myself. He'd arrived with an impressive resume, glowing recommendations, and an MBA from one of the country's best business schools. He seemed intelligent, polite, and eager to prove himself. Within months, Jack had recommended promoting him into the finance department because, according to him, Michael had exceptional attention to detail. Now I understood why. He hadn't joined my company to build a career. He had joined to dismantle mine from the inside. Rebecca opened another folder filled with internal company emails. They've been patient, she said. Very patient. The emails showed Michael quietly requesting access to financial reports, executive files, and shareholder records. Every request had been approved by Jack Harper. None of them had reached my desk because Jack had marked them as routine administrative approvals. I felt sick. For months, I'd believed Jack was making my workload easier. Instead, he'd been opening every locked door inside my company. Rebecca slid one final document across the table. This is what worried me the most. It was a list of emergency board resolutions. One paragraph was highlighted. In the event of the CEO's death, disappearance, or permanent incapacity, interim CEO Jack Harper shall receive full executive authority until ownership transition is complete, asterisk asterisk. My signature appeared at the bottom. It looked perfect. But I'd never seen the document before. They've forged dozens of your signatures, Rebecca said quietly. If we challenge one, they'll simply produce 10 more. I rubbed my forehead, trying to think. So how do we stop them? Rebecca didn't answer immediately. Instead, she opened her laptop and logged into a secure database. After a few seconds, she turned the screen toward me. A live security camera from Walker Technologies filled the display. Jack was standing inside my office. He unlocked the bottom drawer of my desk using a key I didn't know existed. Then he removed a small black safe. My safe. I had installed it years ago without telling anyone except Emily. Jack entered a 6-digit code. The safe opened on the first attempt. I felt my stomach drop. Only 2 people had ever known that combination. Me. And my wife. Jack smiled as he removed a sealed envelope marked, Original Share Certificates. Rebecca immediately closed the laptop. They're making their final move. I looked at her. What do we do? She reached into her bag and placed a single brass key on the table. Before your father died, he left one thing they never found. I picked up the key. What does it open? Rebecca held my gaze for several long seconds. Then she quietly answered. The one place that can destroy Blackridge forever. When our flight landed in Denver, Rebecca and I drove straight to the private bank listed in my father's records. The brass key fit perfectly into safety deposit box 317. Inside wasn't gold, cash, or jewelry. It contained a leather journal, several original share certificates, a USB drive, and a sealed letter addressed to me. My hands shook as I opened the letter. Thomas, if you're reading this, they finally came for you. Don't waste your life chasing revenge. Destroy their evidence, expose their lies, and let the truth finish what I couldn't. Rebecca inserted the USB drive into her laptop. Within seconds, hundreds of files appeared. Secret recordings. Signed agreements. Bank transfers. Hidden ownership records. Every illegal takeover Blackridge had orchestrated over the past 30 years was documented. There were emails between Victor Kane, Jack Harper, and several executives. There were recordings proving forged signatures, fake deaths, insurance fraud, and corporate theft. It was everything federal investigators would need. Rebecca looked at me and smiled for the first time since this nightmare began. Instead of confronting Emily or Jack, we quietly handed every file to a trusted federal prosecutor Rebecca had worked with years earlier. Within hours, sealed warrants were approved. Federal agents began monitoring every office, phone, and bank account connected to Blackridge. 2 days later, Jack Harper walked into what he believed was another board meeting. Instead, FBI agents were waiting. Victor Kane tried to leave through a private exit but was arrested before reaching the parking garage. Michael Kane was taken into custody inside Walker Technologies. News channels across the country interrupted their programming as investigators announced the largest corporate fraud conspiracy in decades. The last arrest happened at my house. Emily opened the front door expecting another celebration. Instead, she found federal agents. As she was escorted outside in handcuffs, our eyes met one last time. She didn't apologize. She didn't cry. She simply whispered. I almost had everything. I looked at her calmly. No, Emily. You lost everything the moment you stopped telling the truth. 6 months later, Walker Technologies was returned to its original shareholders. Every forged document was declared invalid. Jack and Victor were convicted on multiple counts of fraud, conspiracy, and financial crimes. Investigators reopened dozens of cold cases connected to Blackridge, including my father's death. For the first time in nearly 30 years. My father wasn't remembered as a victim. He was remembered as the first man who tried to stop them. On a quiet autumn morning, I stood beside his restored grave and placed the small gold pendant where it belonged. I finished it, I whispered. The wind gently moved through the trees. For the first time since I returned home early that Friday, I finally felt at peace.